welcome to the Exceptional Advisor podcast series brought to you by the Investments and Wealth Institute. The Institute is a professional association, advanced education provider, and standards body for financial advisors, investment consultants, and wealth managers who embrace excellence and ethics. Through our events, continuing education courses, and acclaimed certifications, which include the Certified Investment Management Analyst, the Certified Private Wealth Advisor, and the Retirement Management Advisor certifications, we deliver Ivy League and practical education for investment and wealth professionals. The goal of the Exceptional Advisor podcast series is to help you better serve your clients, differentiate yourself from the competition, and increase your ability to communicate that difference. This is your host, Jamie Green. For 20 years, I served as editor of Investment Advisor magazine and thinkadvisor.com, and now I run the advisor-focused editing and writing firm, Jamie Green Reports. I know that the best advisors are like intellectual sponges. You're always eager to learn from industry experts, and fortunately, we have such an expert here today. But first, our topic, which is how exceptional advisors can meet the unique wealth management needs of the LGBTQ community. You might think that following the Supreme Court's blessing of same-sex marriages in 2015, that meeting the wealth management needs of gay and lesbian couples is now, well, just about the same as opposite-sex couples. But you wouldn't be right. And to get right on this topic, we're fortunate to have Fred Hertz with us. Fred is an attorney and mediator based in San Francisco and Oakland, whose career has included serving as a litigator, specializing in property and financial disputes between unmarried couples, both same-sex and opposite-sex. His legal practice now specializes in drafting real property co-ownership agreements, cohabitation agreements, and premarital agreements for couples, both gay and straight. He also works as a mediator and arbitrator, especially in the area of mediating same-sex dissolutions. Thank you, Fred, for taking the time today to share your insights, and welcome.
Happy to be here. I love talking about these topics.
Great. So let's start with the 40,000-foot view of how that 2015 Supreme Court ruling that found state prohibitions against same-sex marriage to be unconstitutional, which followed the prior ruling in 2013, which had extended federal recognition to same-sex couples. They could get federal benefits. Clearly, these were watershed rulings for the lesbian and gay community. But if you could, for wealth advisors who may not specialize in LGBTQ issues, can you explain whether these rulings made the legal life of same-sex couples, married couples, just like that of opposite-sex couples?
So the answer is the moment they get married now, under state law, whatever state they live in, or under federal law with the recognition, the moment they get married, their legal rules and their legal life is the same. But nobody is just born the day they get married. And so what is most significant, and this is something that advisors really need to be aware of, is the historical events of the last, I would say, 36 years totally shape the legal and financial posture of the couples that you're dealing with. So just as the simplest of examples, there have been domestic partnership registrations since 1979 in Berkeley. I testified in 1982 for domestic partnership registration in San Francisco, which, by the way, Dianne Feinstein vetoed, just to give a sense of history, when she was mayor. And ever since that, there have been state domestic partnerships, city domestic partnerships, marriages that were invalidated, marriages that were validated, marriages that may not be valid for other reasons. And the people you're working with, assuming they're older than 20 or 21 years old, are going to have a history, both financially and legal, that can be very, very messy. And unless you understand that history, just the simplest thing, when someone says, are you registered as domestic partners? Well, is that a state registration? That's marriage equivalent. Is it a city registration? It's not marriage equivalent. Most people don't even know themselves. So when you, the advisor, asks them, first of all, you shouldn't even assume they know the answer. Imagine if you asked somebody whether they were married and they'd say, I don't know. I had a ceremony, but I don't know if it's valid. Well, that's the complexity that differentiates same-sex couples from straight couples. So if people were just born the day that they got married or were only 20 years old, then their legal situation will be the same as straight couples. But the last 35 years of legal treatment of same-sex couples is complicated. There was city registration, there was state registration in some states but not others. There are couples that got married and their marriages were invalidated. There were couples that we don't know if they were married or not, if their marriage was invalidated. There are couples that never terminated their past domestic partnerships or marriages before they re-partnered or remarried. And all of those legal arrangements can impact who owns what duties they have to each other, whether they are treated married or not. And so if you're going to be advising couples, you need to know their marital status. You need to know their marital status history. And let me add one more piece about this, which is that unlike most straight couples who know when they were married and whether they were married, many same-sex couples don't even know, for example, if they registered with the city of San Francisco, it is not equivalent to marriage. It doesn't trigger community property. But if they registered with the state of California, it does trigger community property. So it's not just that you as their advisor don't know, they may not know.
Wow.
And in order to help them, you have to ascertain that marital status and what it has been for as long as they've been together. And that can be very complicated.
Well, I mean, what a tangled mess. How do you untangle that? Does that mean a lot of research on the part of somebody like you, I assume, or going back through records, paper records, or how do you untangle that?
It depends on the situation. So, for example, if the couple hasn't kept their registration form, you can actually call the California Secretary of State, and there's equivalents in Illinois and in Wisconsin and other places where you can actually call or write to the government office and say, this is my name, do you have me registered? Sometimes that's required. Sometimes people remember enough of what happened that we can figure it out. But for example, and just to use a situation that I just was dealing with earlier today, California did this crazy thing where they allowed people to register. In 2000, it was not marriage equivalent. And then in 2005, it retroactively became marriage equivalent. But not every lawyer knows that. And so whether the community property extends before 2005 or not, that's to be addressed. Another example is New Jersey has had multiple types of registration. They have a civil union, they have a domestic partnership, and each has different rules. And that's an example where if you're advising somebody from New Jersey, you actually might need to send them to a lawyer for an hour or two to help that. And what I would say the key thing of being the advisor is to know the question to ask. You're not expected to have the answer. But when someone says, oh, we're domestic partners, you have to be able to say, oh, according to your gym, according to the state of New Jersey, according to IBM, your employer, and you need to be smart enough to know the differences between different forms of domestic partnership so you can ask that question.
And maybe staying at the top level again for another minute or two. I mean, are there unique wealth management issues that perhaps even especially wealthier LGBTQ married couples face that straight couples don't have to deal with? Are there still social, cultural dynamics that frequently arise for same-sex couples that are different than the typical issues for straight couples who you also advise, right?
So let me say these are all issues that straight couples sometimes deal with, but they're very different. And here's the basic issue, and it's sort of one of the dirty secrets, I'd like to say, or untold stories, which is that most of our marital laws are gendered in their origin, and they are gendered in their psychology. So when I work with straight women and they're going to get married, they have no problem saying, I get half of what he has. Without me, he wouldn't know how to get out of bed. Without me, he wouldn't know how to put his tie on. Women have been raised to expect to be taken care of. And most straight men were raised by women, raised by their mothers, and they actually feel proud to be the provider. When I work with straight couples and we're talking about what's to happen, and I say, well, are you going to be paying your wife's bills? They're like, of course, I'm the provider. I mean, what's interesting, by the way, is now almost half the straight couples, the women make more than the men, and the women don't particularly think they should be paying their no good husband's bills. But there is a gender, or what I call heteronormative framework for the laws of marriage. Well, in this gay and lesbian community, this is not the norm. First of all, people have been living for decades without these rules, right? So the wealthy man or the wealthy woman who's made $10 million before they even could get married, they're not even a question. It's all his money. Now, had they been married and they'd been straight and gotten married, maybe it would be community property or equitably marital property. But these couples couldn't have shared it. The retirement accounts, the $5 million in the retirement account, that's never going to be community property or marital property because it was earned before that. But even apart from that legal history, most lesbian women and most gay men do not subscribe to the heteronormative rules. So, in fact, the bigger problem is when they do get married and then they get divorced and then they're told, oh, you have to share half of it. They're like, what do you mean? He wasn't a wife who took care of our kids. He was just a lazy, guy who sat around, smoking dope. So whether it's in a prenup situation or divorce situation, there's a cultural and social disconnect to a great extent. I mean, there are some couples, there are a lot of lesbian couples where one wife quit work to raise the kids, and they do feel this way. But the majority, they don't think of it as our money. And what I find is that the legal right to marry has actually outpaced the social acceptance of the marital rules. So I can't tell you how many couples I work with when they're like, well, we just married because we had the civil right. That doesn't mean I should pay spousal support, or that doesn't mean she should get half of my retirement. So, and also, like, for example, with domestic partners, which are marriage equivalent, a vast percentage of the couples who registered didn't even know that. So when you say to them, oh, that was in California marital property going back 15 years, they're like, no, that's just all mine. And you say, well, you thought it was yours, but it was actually marital. Whereas in the straight community, what I always say is at least half the people you're dealing with have already been divorced at least once, so they know the rules. And there's much greater social acceptance of the marital law rules. So if you're representing another example would be typically in a hetero couple, the husband and wife will both meet with the advisor and they will talk about our money and our retirement plan. So when I'm working with same-sex couples, often the wealthy one has never even told their partner what their assets are. They've gone to meet with their advisor on their own. They haven't even brought their partner. They may not even know that when they state registered in California or in New Jersey or in Oregon, they may not even know that marital law applies to them. And when they're told what the law is, they may feel very indignant, very uncomfortable on both ends. The low earner, the non-wealthy partner may feel like, that's his. I'm not expecting it. And the wealthy woman might say, wait, that's not to be shared. They don't even want to tell the other person that they may have a legal right to it. And so the laws of marriage have actually moved much more quickly than the social cultural norm has. I'm working now with younger gay and lesbian couples, and they are much more in the groove of, oh yeah, we're married. It's just like mom and dad. We may even have kids. But the older same-sex couples don't think that way at all.
So, and maybe this analogy is incorrect, but I think of like, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, maybe it's longer than, women, for instance, if they were married, they couldn't get a credit card on their own, or they'd have to have their husband co-sign their loan. So those rules have changed now. Well, rules. I don't even know if there were rules.
Oh, they were rules.
Traditions. Oh, they were. Okay.
What I would say, though, is that this stuff goes very deep. I mean, the other reason it comes up, it just came up in a prenup I'm negotiating, is that when people are of a similar class and one of them drops out of the workforce out of a family decision, like one person needs to stay home to raise the kids, or we're going to move to New York and you can't get a job there. People feel very differently about that differential of income. Well, when you look at most hetero couples, they're often very much of the same social class. And when one of them isn't making money or doesn't have money, it's either because of inheritance, but it's also sometimes because of a family decision. Well, if you think about your lesbian and gay friends, you often have very diverse cross-class and cross-race relationships. You often have situations where one is making a lot more because they've always made more, and they're not, and the other one's making less because they've always made less, but not because of raising kids. So the attitudes towards caretaking and sharing and about money can be very deep and very different than in the straight community.
Well, let me go a little bit deeper into what advisors should know about the areas you specialize in, which is property co-ownership agreements and premarital agreements. What's new in that area? What hasn't changed? Are these legal rulings by the Supreme Court, for instance, changing the way issues are handled in those agreements?
So one of the problems that financial managers tap into is there can be a lot of problems with how documents were titled in the past, if there was uncertainty about whether they were married or not. Also, in the beginning, a lot of title companies got things wrong, so you can have a situation where people were married, but the title company didn't recognize it. The other issue has to do with how the financial management company themselves handles documentation. So if in California, for example, if an asset is community property, you need to have the spouse's sign off in order to make a valid transfer. Different rules in New York, different rules in Massachusetts. And if you don't know whether your clients were married or not, or are married, you don't even know what's the right thing there. Even the most basic question of, can a spouse call you and make a transaction? Can a spouse call you and write it and have money sent? All those protocols of, do I treat this person as a spouse or not, can hang on, were they domestically partnered? Were they registered? Is their marriage valid? So these are all issues that come up in a way that is different for a straight couple. And then the last one is that in order to do estate planning, and a lot of financial planners get involved with estate planning, you have to know what's yours, what's ours. And oftentimes people need to be sent over to a family law attorney to do a postmarital agreement or a transmutation agreement, because how they think of their assets may be different from how the law sees it. So these are all the kinds of complexities that grow out of this 20-year past history of uncertainty around marital status.
So maybe for our final question, you've already said several things that are good to know, I think, for all advisors. But could you give our listeners really 2 or 3 takeaways on whether on one of the topics we discussed today, and whether prenuptial agreements for all kinds of couples or the specific wealth management issues faced by gay and lesbian couples?
Sure. Well, the first thing is, don't presume that this family works the way your family does. So ask them, do you share money? Do you not share money? Do you consider it yours? Do you consider it his? Ask the people how they think about money, and be prepared for some difficult conversations, because there are a lot of people I find in the LGBT community who haven't taken these issues seriously, haven't really thought about them. And you, the financial advisor, may be the first one to raise the question. So ask with an open mind and engage in a conversation that allows different answers. You may even find out, for example, I'm just working with a couple, or I should say a threesome, where 2 of the 3 are married to each other, but the primary relationship is between one of them and a person she's not related to legally. There's reasons for it, but you have to be open to it. The second is show that you care by being educated. I don't just mean this as a plug for my book. There are other books out there as well. But if you can actually say to your gay or lesbian clients, oh, I read Fred's book, or I read this article, or I watched this video, or even I've listened to this podcast, and I learned so much. I learned about all the problems with registration and non-recognition. You'll not only know more, but you'll be sending a signal to your clients that you care about their situation in a way that is incredibly meaningful and will overcome the possible glitches. The third, I would say, is rethink your protocols, your forms, everything from how you ask somebody. You don't just say, are you domestically partnered, yes or no? You have to say, in what state, in what city? You have a copy of your registration form. You also need to be able to be training your staff to using the right words. For example, if you have a transgender client, you have to be thinking about what pronoun to use for that person. You may have a situation where the name somebody gives you doesn't match the gender of the name in your own records. So you'll need to be able to say, oh, I see that there's different names here. Which name do you prefer that I use? Which pronoun do you prefer that I use? Some people like spouse, some people don't. So show a humility in dealing with other people, and that will really help you overcome whatever confusions there are about the legal rules, which are so complicated.
Well, that's great. I particularly like the show humility thing, which is probably not a bad idea for people to do in general, especially advisors and working with couples and families. So thank you so much, Fred Hertz of Frederick C. Hertz, attorney at law in Oakland and San Francisco, for sharing your insights on how advisors can better serve their LGBTQ and straight couples. Thank you, Fred.
Thank you for asking.
If you've enjoyed today's podcast, we invite you to subscribe through iTunes, Spotify, or on our website at investmentsandwealth.org to get the latest episodes of our Exceptional Advisor podcast series. The Investments and Wealth Institute has been helping investment and wealth professionals become exceptional advisors for over 30 years. Please visit us on our website at investmentsandwealth.org to learn more about our certifications, conferences, online learning, and continuing education programs. This is Jamie Green for the Investments and Wealth Institute, thanking you for your time and attention and wishing you much success.